The idea is to start talking about how we can build secure agents with MCP and APIs. The idea of the presentation is to talk about, we introduce the idea of OpenID AuthZEN, which is an open standard that comes within the authorization space. And this is one of the latest features that introduces by OpenFGA, which is great. The main idea, because when we usually dealing with open standard, is that we can apply the same approach, the same authorization standard across the entire stack. So this is the main idea when you are on top of open standard. So in the next one, quickly here, because well, I have been working in the identity space for almost 20 years. I'm the CTO and Identity Architect at TwoGenIdentity. We focus on the identity and access manager space. And the last time I shift toward Identity AI platform, more related to the security side. I usually ended up working with open source software. This is why I'm part of the Kiklo community and OpenFGA as well. And usually we build on top of open source software or enhance the platform, or we build your own agentic platform. And we have experience as well with the commercial AIM side. Okay, I'm going to start with the next one. When I start talking about authentication and authorization, you can move to the next one, Andres. I try to explain the problem in the next slide. I usually split the problem in two. Authentication, for the one who have been playing in the authentication space, nowadays we have open standards such as OpenID Connect and OAuth. So we are delegating the authentication toward the identity provider, and hopefully there you have a phishing-resistant authenticator. But I would say that we are able to handle the authentication stage with, as I said before, OpenID Connect and OAuth. When we move toward the authorization, so far we are dealing with these challenges, which usually we're dealing in the next one with the security and compliance. I would say this is the first one. And then the idea of the presentation is to try to put focus on the open standard and interoperability. This is the main idea of OpenID AuthZEN, to give you a way to try to solve this problem. And we usually deal with authorization complexity and finding authorization at different layer of the journey. But again, the idea of the presentation is to try to tackle the idea of having an open standard and interoperability between the communication between the policy enforcement point and policy decision point. So in the next one, because I'm going to try to talk about agents. So for me, there is no other way to talk about agent if I'm not introduce the idea of MCP and open standard, just to give a general context. So at the beginning, we're going to see in the next slide that we usually exposed the information with APIs, but nowadays we have different ways of exposing the information. Basically, the agent can use MCP, which is an open standard that allows to the agent to do the execution of the resource on behalf of the user. And the main idea is that the MCP host is where the agent lives. You can use Cloud, Copilot, or your own agent. Then you have the MCP server, which is exposing the capabilities to the agent. It could be tool, resource, or prompt. But one of the most important things that the API layer remains the same. So no matter if you're using an application or an agent is talking with an MCP, then we must protect the API layer. This is why we are going to see here that we are going to apply policy enforcement point at different layers. It could be at the agentic AI layer, the MCP layer, at the API layer as well. So just a little bit more about MCP. As I said before, at the beginning, we usually expose the data over APIs or microservices. Nowadays, with the idea of agentic AI, we can expose the information towards MCP, which basically we're exposing the capabilities to the agent. And nowadays, we can expose application over the MCP with the idea of MCP apps. MCP apps is an extension on top of MCP, which is give you a way to expose application while using the agent. But again, no matter if we are talking about APIs, MCPs, the idea that we are dealing with the same security problem is basically we are trying to define if the actor, it could be an agent of a user, can execute an action on behalf of the user or can act at a protected resource. A double click here with MCP, I would say that introduce the problem that we are dealing with, perhaps with OAuth at the default scope. So it's not easy, basically, to apply fine-grained authorization with the scope. There is no way to do that. This is why we are using OpenFGA as the fine-grained authorization layer. This is one of the points. And then we usually deal with a multiple hop problem because the agent is using an MCP server, then the MCP server is accessing the APIs. So we have multiple hubs while implementing the journey. And the last point is no matter if we are in an API layer of the MCP layer as well, we have to solve the fine-grained authorization, and this is how we use OpenFGA in this case. Okay. This is my, let's say, understanding about the current situation about the open standard. Here I'm talking about agents, but I'm going to use the same standard if I have to expose if I going to expose an API. But here to quickly go over the chart, I used to explain the agent if we are in the A2A, because it's based in agent to agent of the MCP case, and the MCP case, I usually split the process in two on behalf of the user or autonomous agent. I'm going to cover the interactive case on behalf of the user, and then we are going to apply the common identity standard. So we are going to use OAuth and OpenID Connect. OAuth was the adopted standard within the MCP community. So if you want to expose an MCP, you have to adopt OAuth. There is no other way to do it. So I'm not going to cover all the single standard here, but I want to say that we are going to apply the core standard that come from OAuth and OpenID Connect, and then we are going to extend the authorization capabilities with OpenID AuthZEN, which is a new standard that come here in order to help us to solve the authorization decision in a standard way. In the next one, I'm going to go quickly over the core standards. We have OpenID Connect, which is basically a standard that comes to help us in the authentication stage. It's basically on top of OAuth. And then we are going to apply OAuth as the access delegation standard. This is the core. The first one is going to help us to prove who the agent or agent is. And then on top of OAuth, we are going to have the access delegation stage, which is basically defining what the agent or app can do on behalf of the user. That's the core. OpenID Connect, authentication, OAuth, access delegation, and then we are going to use the access token. We're protecting the MCP or APIs-based OAuth. And then in the next one, finally, I'm going to introduce the OpenID AuthZEN. So once we have the core standard, which is OAuth and OpenID Connect, we're introducing OpenID AuthZEN. OpenID AuthZEN comes from OpenID Foundation, which is great, the one that ended up defining OpenID Connect. And OpenID AuthZEN is basically, simplifying the idea, is going to give you a standard message between the policy enforcement point and the policy decision point. So as I said before, OpenFGA ended up adopting, as an, I believe, experimental feature so far, adopting new endpoints that come from OpenID AuthZEN in order to expose this new endpoint to have a standard message between those components. And then on top of that, we have the authorization model, which is in this case is freeback because OpenFGA is based Zanzibar. Okay, in the next one, I used to try to explain the authorization component based on the P*P architecture. So I usually try to explain that the first component is the policy enforcement point. It could be a gateway, it could be the MCP or your API, but basically it's the first component that is going to enforce the authorization decision. And then we have the policy decision point, which is in this case OpenFGA, which OpenFGA is going to use their own authorization model, which in this case is freeback. We have in the middle, basically the blue line. The blue line is the open standard, which OuthZEN define this kind of a standard message between the policy decision point and the policy enforcement point. And thanks to that, we are going to achieve interoperability. One of the key benefits that we are going to see in the next slides is like when you are on top of an open standard. I was saying, when we are on top of an open standard, it happens the same when you want to use OpenID Connect. It's going to give you, the first thing is interoperability, which is great. Then we are able to apply the pattern of decoupled authorization towards the OpenFGA. At the same time, we're able to apply the pattern. We're going to see in the next slide, but we are going to apply externalized authorization because we can use a gateway in front of the MCP or API in order to delegate the authorization decision. But one of the main keys that here, on top of OpenID AuthZEN, we can talk with different PDPs, with different authorization model in a standard way. Okay, this is the pattern quickly here. I usually try to explain the authorization pattern in 3 layers. The first one is the legacy. Let's say when we usually use the authorization decision in the code, we don't want to do that. In the pattern 2 is when we are decoupling authorization. The idea is that we are delegating the authorization decision towards an external service, in this case, OpenFGA. And then the pattern 3 is when we are able to externalize authorization, usually through an gateway. It could be an API gateway, AI gateway, MCP gateway, whatever they want to choose it, but we are externalize the authorization towards a gateway. Our recommendation is to try to follow the pattern 2 and 3 for agentic AI, and at the same as the API security side, we are externalizing at the complete authorization with OpenID AuthZEN. Here is the diagram that you will find in the with OpenID Connect, but it's quite common to see in the authorization side. Basically, we have the application or agent is the same for me. In this case, I'm doing the enforcement of the AuthZEN policy enforcement point at the gateway layer. We have this standard message between the policy enforcement point and the PDP, in this case, OpenFGA. These standard measures, I'm simplifying the idea, but come with the AuthZEN subject action resource context. As you can see here, it's quite similar to the one we have in OpenFGA. In OpenFGA, we have the user and then the relation at the object. Here we are saying subject resource action, but it's quite similar. And then we introduce the context as well for giving more information to the PDP. But the idea is that every single request goes through the gateway delegates toward OpenFGA. This is, I usually use the gateway for the quartz grain authorization step. And then at the API layer or the MCP layer, we can apply the same approach. We are doing the fine grain authorization on top of the OpenID AuthZEN towards the OpenFGA. So we have these kind of multiple policy enforcement point at different layers of the journey, and every single PAP is on top of the standard. Okay, this is the endpoint that you will find in OpenFGA. I'm going to just to put focus on the evaluation endpoint. Perhaps one of the difference in OpenFGA, because OpenFGA ended up using stores and the authorization model, that when you want to talk with the access evaluation endpoint, you have to specify the store ID. And then I believe that the authorization model comes within the header, it's an optional parameter. But this is how you end up talking with OpenID AuthZEN evaluation endpoint. And of course, you will have the well-known endpoint is quite common to use in the OpenID side. Is going to do the discovery of the endpoint from the IDP. You can do the same. You can apply the same approach with OpenFGA to do the discovery in real time about the authorization endpoints. What we have here, okay, quickly, here I'm doing the enforcement at the gateway layer. So the application or the agent is making a request. The gateway is doing the first policy enforcement point. Basically, the gateway is parsing the the API request on the MCP request is the same, extracting the subject, method, and resource, and talking real time with the policy enforcement point in order to enforce the policies at the OpenFGA level. The PDP goes towards the policy decision and then returns to the gateway if the subject is allowed or not, execute an action. And then we have the typical communication between the gateway and the API or MCP. We can apply, again, the same idea at the API MCP level. So the MCP or API can talk again over AuthZEN with OpenFGA, usually for fine-grained authorization decisions. Here's how we usually use a base model that comes with the identity governance platforms, which is usually the identity, organization, roles, relation between roles, relationship between groups, and so on. So this is the example. You enable the experimental feature on OpenFGA, and here's an example of the access evaluation request. It's quite easy to follow up. You have the subject, the resource, and the action. I usually ended up adding context, which is the time or perhaps the authentication mechanism reference. Basically, all information that come from the access token. This is identity stuff, but usually I usually add more context to the AuthZEN request. But again, it's quite similar at the one you end up seeing with the user relationship and object. Here is subject, resource, and action. Finally, our implementation. I usually do like a quick checklist because I'm an identity guy. I usually expose every single endpoint, no matter if I'm talking about MCP or API, is protected by WAF. I'm delegate the authentication toward the identity provider. It could be Keycloak in your case, or it could be auth0 or Okta. But the main idea is that I'm delegating the authentication access delegation stage toward the IDP. And again, I'm doing the same idea with the authorization stage. I'm delegating the authorization now on top of OpenID AuthZEN, Open Standard. I'm delegating the authorization to OpenFGA, and OpenFGA is acting as the PDP. As I said before, in my experience, there is no way to expose an MCP or AI services and API with one policy enforcement point. In my experience, I have multiple policy enforcement points during the AI or API journey, usually coarse grain at the gateway level and fine grain at the API or MCP level. We adopt zero trust and we apply fine grain authorization with reback and pback as well. I don't know how much time I have left, but quickly, this is the implementation of the open source gateway that you will find in our site. But basically, we add on top of an open source API gateway the implementation of OpenID AuthZEN. Quite easy to configure. Basically, the endpoint of the PDP. We introduced the idea of the platform because I have additional feature for OpenFGA, like doing the discovery of the store ID, because I need it when talking with the access evaluation endpoint. And then you will find here the AuthZEN request, subject, resource, and action. Here I'm going to split the process in two. When you are protecting an API, you usually, if you want to use a gateway, you usually use the idea of path in order to protect the different endpoint. But then when you move towards MCP security, you usually have one endpoint, which is the MCP server. And nowadays, there is a way that you end up translating the MCP request towards the AuthZEN request. It's basically parsing the MCP request, grabbing the tool name, the properties, and the method, and you translating on the fly to AuthZEN request, and then the gateway is talking with OpenFGA in order to validate the policies. Here's my view. This is how we implement the authorization. As I said before, no matter if we are talking about an agent on top of MCP or the agent is talking directly with an API, OpenClaw proves that the agent can do both. So we are applying the policy enforcement point and the MCP layer, and of course, and the API layer as well, because you never know if the agent is going to talk about MCP or to talk about directly with your services. In both cases, I'm delegating the authorization decision towards, in this case, OpenFGA for the fine grain, and then I'm delegating the authentication on top of OpenID and OAuth. And you can apply the same idea at the MCP server at the API layer as well. You can delegate the authentication, access delegation, just-in-time authorization towards your identity provider, and then you can delegate the access decisions towards the PDP. And the last two, here is our agentic platform. We are using our gateways to expose APIs and or MCP. And in this case, no matter if I'm using my own agent or if we are using our MCP apps services, we apply the same principle. We expose the MCP requests with the gateway. The gateway, again, we are using OAuth. So the gateway is validating the token because the MCP server and the API is acting as the OAuth resource server. So the API or the gateway is going to validate the OAuth token, typical stuff that comes from the identity access manager side. I'm going to parse the token, extract the claim, and then build based on the claims the AuthZEN request, and then I have a communication between the gateway and the PDP, in this case, OpenFGA. The OpenFGA is going to go towards the data because we are on top of Priva, so Priva is basically policy as data. So go towards the relationship between the user, the roles, the organizations, and the groups. And then if the user or the agent is allowed to execute an action, comes with a true or false response to the gateway, and then the gateway is going to talk with the API. So, I believe this is the last one. What I'm trying to usually explain here is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We have open standard. We have OAuth and OpenID Connect. It's good to extend the identity core standard with enhancing functionalities like OpenID AuthZEN. On top of OpenID AuthZEN, we can use OpenFGA as the policy decision point, but I'm seeing that, again, no matter if we are exposing an agent, MCP, or an API, it's like some kind of building blocks that I have my core standard, and on top of that, I'm adding and enhancing the security capabilities, and this is how we expose and build our products. I believe this is the, yeah, and then you will find some links about OpenID AuthZEN. I strongly, if you are in the identity space, as the same as the authorization space, I strongly recommend, if you want to be a member of OpenID Foundation, you will find there identity specialists that are building this open standard. So it's great to be there. And then some links about the open source gateway, and articles are brought about authorization. You know, it was too fast. I want to cover everything. I know it was too much about talking about open standard or and this kind of stuff. But again, for me, it's the only way that we can expose services in a secure way.
Awesome. Thank you, Martin.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it's interesting because when AuthZEN started as a standard, there are two ways of thinking about it. One is I'm gonna now build all my applications, the applications I built internally, on top of standard like AuthZEN, so I can potentially replace my PDP in the future, right? And I wasn't a strong believer on that approach because I think, for example, for OpenFGA, you need to write data to OpenFGA. You have an authorization model. Those things are hard to migrate to another service, right? Even if you're using AuthZEN to do authorization checks. On the other hand, there was a space where there are a lot of places in the infrastructure where you want to check for permissions. So having a standard for that that is useful, because now every API gateway, MCP gateway, can standardize on AuthZEN, and then it can call OpenFGA or something else. So I think that integration use case is interesting, and that's why we are kind of trying to make it work with OpenFGA. Started as an experimental feature, mostly because I wrote it, and engineers don't trust me, so they wanted to see how far this works. But
Yeah,
I think, yeah, go ahead.
I agree with you, Andres. We are using, just to give you another example, I mean, we are using OpenFGA for real-time authorization decision because I'm going through the data, which is great. I'm going through the data. I'm not picking nothing from the token. Let's say in some cases, I'm going through OpenFGA for real-time. Just to give you another point of view, is I'm using OpenFGA from Rebug, and in some cases, I'm using PBAC as well. So it's give you, let's say, a common open standard to play with different authorization model at the same time. It's another way of thinking.